Welcome back to the final hour, the final day of the 2020 Project Play Summit. We're going to close out by looking wide and looking far. The Aspen Institute is based in the US, but we also have international affiliates in more than a dozen countries. Two of them, Aspen, Mexico and Aspen, Romania, have built their own Project Play domestic efforts. This year, Aspen, Romania achieved a huge win, partnering with its Olympic Committee and the Ministries of Youth and Sport and Education to get physical literacy declared a national priority. We want to help more countries. So today, we're announcing a partnership with TEFISA, the world's umbrella organization for Sport for All efforts. TEFISA will share Project Play knowledge and tools with its 360 members in 170 countries. And the Aspen Institute will help bring TEFISA's expertise to North America. To explain, I'd like to welcome in Wolfgang Baumann, Secretary General of TEFISA.
Well, first of all, let me briefly introduce what TEFISA is and what we are doing. Actually, in a nutshell, we are representing the global Sport for All movement. We are constantly increasing in membership, and we can rightly call ourselves the #1 global Sport for All federation. And this is a little bit the background. And for that reason, to increase and to even more empower this Sport for All movement, we are looking for strong partnership and alliances, because we can't do the job just ourselves. The challenges ahead of us are so huge and so complex that we love to join forces. And the Aspen Institute is just a partner that we are very happy that they agreed to cooperate with us, because it's not going without saying that all these partnerships will get into be and start working. And with the Aspen Institute, we believe we have just the right lead partner for various activities as a very strong hold and a central hub in North America and beyond.
One of the more powerful ideas that has emerged internationally is that play is a human right, meaning it's something every child is born with. Given that sport is a key venue for play in our culture, our just released Project Play Platform for Action calls for sport to no longer be treated as a nice to have by leading institutions, and that adults who design policies, programs, recreation sites, and communities should be especially mindful of improving access for underrepresented populations. So where to start? Well, with a statement on the rights of children in sports tailored to the US, which in the coming months our program will create in partnership with Athletes for Hope, a nonprofit that helps pro, Olympic, and college athletes support causes that matter to them. In a few minutes, founder Ivan Blumberg will moderate a panel of athletes who share their ideas about principles that should be reflected in the document. But first, let's bring in Dionne Koller, Director of the Center for Sport and the Law at the University of Baltimore, who has generously agreed to help us draft a children's rights in sports statement. So Dionne, thank you for joining us, and thank you really for all of your contributions to Project Play to date. You were on the Project Play Baltimore advisory group that helped us get that report right, and you've been such a useful resource to me and our team in understanding how policy layers over just youth development and child development, and how we can improve this space and make sport more accessible to more kids. So yeah, thank you again. So let's just start off with let's set the table here. So what is the purpose of a children's rights in sports document or statement?
Well, I think, Tom, the purpose, there are several purposes, but I think it's important in understanding the purpose of this document to understand where we are with youth sports in the United States. We don't have a sports ministry. We don't have a government agency that organizes sport in this country. we are unique in the world in that really nearly every country that participates in the Olympic movement and in international sport has a government agency and has an organizing principle around what sport is supposed to be. So we don't have that in the United States. And so youth sport is really left to the private sector, which has certainly produced some great opportunities and some terrific Olympic and elite athletes. But what's happened is millions and millions of kids, as you've documented well with the Aspen Sport and Society Project, are left on the sidelines. And so what we have is a system where there's no central organizing governing principle. There's no document, there's no discussion, there's no policy making start. And so we don't really have that here. And so when sports programs come online, it's left to sort of individual choices. And what we've seen is that those choices can produce some outcomes that aren't good for sport, that aren't good for kids, and ultimately aren't good for public health.
Yeah. And so what's interesting is in our society, I mean, children can't vote. They don't technically have a voice in the design of really anything. So how important is it and can this resource be useful in bringing the voice of children into the design of experiences that might meet their needs?
Yeah, I think a document like this is critical because one of the other things the data show, and again, you've done a really good job documenting this, is that we have a couple problems in youth sports in the United States. We have a crisis of exclusion, which is not enough kids are getting into the game because they don't have access to it. And we have a crisis of retention. We have a crisis of burnout. So we have too many kids who they do have access and they do participate and they walk away at that critical age 13 where they say, I'm burned out, this isn't fun, and I don't want to do this anymore. And again, for the national sort of goals and what we want for elite sport, as well as what we want for public health, those aren't great outcomes. And so putting kids' voices into the design of sport programs is something we really haven't focused on, but by doing so, we can drill down and get to the design of programs that include and retain more kids.
Mm-hmm. How could such a statement or document be used by various stakeholders? You know, policy leaders, could NGBs use it, national governing bodies, could local sport organizations, government, you know, grant makers? I mean, help me think through the application and who would use it.
I think all of the above, Tom. I think one of the things that we've seen in sports is that there is such a great need for education. We have a lot of terrific people that, for instance, coach youth sports, that volunteer to be a part of youth sports. But I think one of the lessons from the USA Gymnastics, for instance, abuse scandal and different congressional investigations into our sports programs is that we also know that we have a lot of people involved in sports who simply don't understand how programs should be structured, what the goals should be. And so a document like this can be used for those who are working in sports to better orient them as sort of a North Star. How should we design these programs? But we've also seen too often, and I think congressional hearings this summer really underscored this, that too often our policymakers don't understand what the needs are in sports. And so this can educate them as well. So I think all throughout the landscape of youth sports, I think this document can be incredibly helpful to educate every type of stakeholder so that everybody's on the same page about what the goals should be, about what's developmentally appropriate, and what's going to get us to where we want to be in United States youth sport.
Where else have we seen such a document be useful in being a foundational piece in building an effective sports system?
Well, I think Norway has been the shining example of this. And I think, you can't argue with outcomes, and Norway is on the top of the medal stands. For a country as small as they are, they produce elite athletes at just an astonishing rate. They also produce happy athletes and widespread participation. And so Norway adopted a children's rights in sports document. It was adopted throughout the country at all levels. There is alignment with their Olympic program. It sort of deliberately works works with that program. And so it's been a really important guiding, organizing feature of sports in Norway. And I think it's a blueprint really for any country who wants to rethink how they're doing youth sports.
Mm-hmm. So, I've been there, I've been to Norway, you kick the tires on this idea as well. To anyone who would say that, well, that's Norway. It's a tiny country in Europe and maybe more homogenous than we are. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but whatever. Norway is different than we are. What would you say to that?
Well, I think, of course, there are differences between Norway and the United States, but I think what we know through the Olympic movement is that sport is universal. And what we need participation. We need kids to stick with it. And so the lessons from sports and the barriers to sports and the issues that come up in sports, those truly are universal. That's not anything unique to Norway or the United States. And so I think we can take Norway's lesson, their blueprint, their document as very, very informative, because it really doesn't matter where you're a kid playing sports. We know throughout the world, you want to have fun, you want to develop skills. And from a nationwide perspective, you ultimately want your youth sports program to both help or support public health, but also result in great outcomes for elite sports. So I think it doesn't matter that this document is a Norwegian document. It could be from anywhere. I think the lessons are truly universal.
When we talk about a right, are there legal implications? Does it mean that we're now setting up a scenario where, I don't know, the 11-year-old is able to sue the local Little League because, he or she got stuck on the bench for 4 innings? I mean, what does that mean exactly, a right?
Yeah, I think sometimes the word right, this is where there is a very different perspective in the United States and Norway, and I think it's really worth clearing up. Rights can be used in many different ways, and certainly there are legal rights. You can give people rights to sue and rights to go to court and seek redress. That's not what the point of this document would be. There are lots of different rights or conceptions of rights. There are moral rights, there are normative rights. The idea of a right that I think is instructive for this document is creating norms, is creating best practices around sports. And it's also the idea when we speak of rights, and this is outside the concept of legal rights, but when we speak of rights, we're really speaking about individuals and looking at individual experiences and looking at individual autonomy. And so I think rights from that perspective is crucially important as we talk about youth sports, because we really haven't done that enough. So no, Tom, this isn't going to be a document that gives anybody a right to sue because their coach kept him on the bench.
Exactly. It's just basically saying, look, take this seriously. Kids deserve it. Right. I hear you. So what would be the key features? I know we haven't built this thing yet, and we still need to figure it out, but what are some of the key features that could be in such a document?
So I would see it as having 3 core values that would sort of underpin the entire project. And I think those values would be inclusiveness, responsiveness, and clarity. And I think the document needs to be inclusive in the sense that it would be looking to establish rights or establish these principles or norms that include and provide for participation for all kids. And we know we don't have that in the United States, and we know we'd be so much better off if we did. So I think inclusiveness is number 1. I think the second thing for this document is responsiveness. And by this, I mean, we need to really pay attention to what kids are telling us about sports, because they tell us a whole lot and they vote with their feet. And we haven't taken that into account thus far. So this document would be responsive in the sense that it would listen to kids, it would respond to kids, and it would build programs that are safe, healthy, developmentally appropriate, but also take into account that it's kids' bodies and lives that are doing sports. And so I think that's crucially important as well. And then the third thing is clarity, Tom, and this is what we started out talking about. We don't have a lot of clarity in the United States around what should youth sports programs be about? What values should they serve? What benchmarks should they have? What are the best practices? It stuns me whenever I give a talk about youth sports, I have parents talk to me and say, wait, can they do that? Is that true? That's not the law. Nobody's taking care of that. No government agencies paying attention? And the answer is no. And so I think we need a lot of clarity around these programs, and that can just bring an enormous, helpful, sort of unifying principle to what we're trying to do.
Terrific. Well, Dionne, look forward to digging into this project with you and with Athletes for Hope. And with that, I'd like to bring in Ivan Blumberg, the founder of Athletes for Hope, who will lead a conversation with us.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Ivan Blumberg. I'm the CEO of Athletes for Hope. Athletes for Hope is an organization founded by some amazing folks: Muhammad Ali, Andre Agassi, Mia Hamm, Warwick Dunn, Jackie Joyner-Kersee. We are over 7,000 athletes in 25 different sports. And on behalf of all of those athletes, we're really honored to be able to partner with Project Play on what I think is a really important conversation. I want to compliment Tom and his entire team for the important and really timely work that they're doing. We took a look at our entire athlete base and we asked our team which athletes were passionate about youth sports in this particular space, and really 3 athletes bubbled up. And so we're thrilled to have you guys with us. I'm going to take a minute and introduce each of you, and then we're just going to dive into a conversation. Our first Athletes for Hope member is Lacey Henderson. Lacey is a Paralympic track and field athlete. She is a 6-time U.S. national champion in the long jump. She's the world record holder in the pole vault, the American record holder in the long jump. She's a Paralympic athlete from 2016, a silver medalist at the 2019 Pan Am Games. And while she did plan on going to Tokyo in 2020, she is currently training for the 2021 Paralympic Games in Tokyo. So our second athlete is Kayla Alexander. Kayla is a fantastic WNBA player with the Minnesota Lynx. Interestingly, Kayla grew up in Canada. She is Canadian. And so we'll have an opportunity at some point later on to maybe do a little contrasting between youth sports in Canada and the United States. She is an Orangeman. She went to Syracuse University as an undergrad. Was drafted 8th by the San Antonio Stars into the WNBA. And interestingly, she's not just an incredible athlete, she's actually an author. She's published her first book. It's called The Magic of Basketball. She wrote it and published it with her sister. And it sort of draws some intersecting lines between the benefits of sports, basketball, and youth sports, which made it appropriate. Our third athlete is Eric Kendricks. Eric is a linebacker with the Minnesota Vikings. While he was at UCLA, he won the Butkus Award as the top linebacker in college football, where he was also an All-American. He's led the Vikings in tackles 5 years in a row, and last year was named to his first Pro Bowl and his first team All-Pro honors. He is as active off the field as he is on it. And we see this at Athletes for Hope firsthand all the time. Without further ado, let's jump in. I think you guys heard the purpose of the panel in the earlier discussion. How do you guys feel as professional athletes about creating a document that really declares that every child has this right to play sports, and sort of describing the type of experience that those children are entitled to?
I have been, I've been lucky enough, I think, growing up in my life, that I've been put in sports like through private institutions, and just having even the privilege of my own disability to be able enough to join traditional sports. And now that I have spent almost 10 years now doing Paralympic sport and seeing international sport and international governing bodies, the way that they treat their sport programs much differently than how we do here, especially when it comes to youth development, development of sport, development of Olympic and Paralympic sport. It is exciting to see more movements being made towards youth that don't have the same opportunities that I think I had growing up. I was lucky enough to be a collegiate athlete and then do Paralympics, but especially in the disability world, there are not a lot of athletes that get the opportunity to participate, especially at higher collegiate levels, unless you can score points in the system. And I think our country we've gotten very comfortable feeding NCAA athletes into more elite sport programs. And when it comes to many of the different facets of disability, that has proven to not be strong development for our teams.
Fantastic, thank you. So Eric, when you think about your own youth sports experience, talk to us a little bit about that. And did it serve your needs? If you look back on it today as, you know, an all-pro in the NFL, if you could change some things about your own youth experience, what would those be? How would you, if you could wave a magic wand and improve it, what would that look like?
First of all, like, sports to me was everything. You know, it provided me structure. It provided me something to go to after school and participate in, as well as, you know, that social aspect as well. You know, learning how to be on a team, dealing with people from all different types of backgrounds and religions and things like that. But the thing that sticks out to me the most, you know, especially, you know, playing football, is just the safety aspect of it. I know hearing about the youth football leagues now, they have a bigger emphasis on the safety of, you know, tackling and things like that. But when I was a kid, you know, it was like kind of like go out and hit each other. You know what I mean? Go out and use your helmet to hit somebody. So just cleaning up that part of it, you know, I feel like that part of the sport could discourage people, especially at a young age.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's been a bit of a top-down approach. It feels like the NFL has taken on a bit of a leadership role in cleaning up the safety at its level, and now it feels like that's beginning to trickle down. And interestingly, when we look at, get to it at the end, sort of some of the things that we may want to include in sort of a Bill of Rights, I think, you know, health and safety concerns needs to be on that list, right? How do we
Definitely
make kids, you know, at 10, 11, 12 years old that are blocking and tackling can be in a position where they can actually play when they're 16, 17, 18 years old, right?
Yeah. One thing that sticks to my mind when you say that is just, you know, just like simple hydration knowledge. You know what I mean? You know, when I was a kid, you know, between practices or double days or whatever we had, the hydration practice was not there. And now that I've grown up throughout athletics and in college and stuff like that, there's much bigger emphasis on hydration just for your muscles and your recovery aspects. So just something that simple, you know, could be, you know, implemented.
For sure. So Kayla, how are you?
Doing well.
Glad. So talk to us a little bit about your youth sports experience. Sort of similarly, did it serve you well? Did it check the boxes that you needed it to check? You know, you grew up in Canada, but you now play professional basketball in the United States and have written about it. How has that experienced your working knowledge of youth sports, and how, if you don't mind, might the two countries compare and contrast?
Okay. So growing up, I was pretty fortunate. I grew up in a middle-class family, and my parents were really big advocates on just having active lifestyles. So they put us in a number of different sports growing up because they didn't want us to just be buckled down to one thing. They were very big on trying new things, which I really appreciated because throughout all my different experiences, whether it was through swimming, playing volleyball, basketball, not only did I learn different skill sets, but I also learned how to create and foster like positive relationships with other girls my age. So I developed like social skills. I also felt like I was in a safe environment with different coaches that I had growing up too as well. Like they always create environments where it wasn't bullying. It's very inclusive. And then also through sports, I love that you just learn different things as well as nutrition, taking care of your body and so forth. So it's big picture, not just about the athlete, but a holistic approach. And then with respect to my playing experiences in the States compared to Canada, I will say that in Canada, I was fortunate. I had made opportunities, but I noticed that even when I played in the States and playing professionally and even overseas, you notice that in different countries, like they have like, I guess, like a set of rules or a bill of rights of how much training they want their kids to participate in or their athletes, safety protocols and different things like that. And we don't necessarily have that, not here in the US, and especially not back home in Canada. And I know that's something that they're working towards creating. So it's kind of interesting to see how it varies from country to country, depending on where you play professionally.
How important for you guys do you think it is that kids have this opportunity to experience different sports before they sort of pick one?
Can I start?
Sure.
I think it's really important. I honestly, this is just my biased opinion, but I don't think you should be focusing on one sport before the age of 12 or 13. I feel like when you're a young kid, you're still developing, you need to learn different movements, your muscles need to develop and grow. You need to learn how to just learn from different environments and different skill sets. And I feel like when you specialize so early at such a young age, not only are you like putting wear and tear on your body, you're putting yourself at risk for certain injuries. On top of that, you're also putting yourself at risk at burnout. And I feel like when you're a young kid, you should not be experiencing any form of burnout. Sports should just be a place to go have fun, to be active, to make friends. It should be a nurturing and a positive environment. It shouldn't be a stressful, oh my goodness, like I'm tired, I'm burnt out, this isn't fun anymore. Not when you're young kids.
Yeah, I watch kids sports now, and it feels like it's all the things that you just described as not wanting to be. You know, stressful, burned out, right? Eric, Lacey, your thoughts on sort of the importance of kids having sort of a multi-sport experience growing up?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people are surprised when they find out. Actually, I started track and field after I graduated from college. I was a competitive cheerleader growing up. And before that, played volleyball, played soccer, did all the things. I come from an athletic background. My dad went to the 1968 Olympic trials. So like sport was always in our life. And there's like a weird old school mentality when you are like a gentleman of a certain age that did sports, where like sport, like it will always be in your life. But the holisticness of it, I think had to, like, we grew up with that, which was something that was a little bit more healthy for sure, mentally as well as physically. But I think now you see, coming from seeing kids like that are in private school situations, or seeing kids that want to become elite athletes, even in the disability spectrum, you have to get specific equipment for any type of activity you do. And oftentimes that's driven by the parents, but you can't just compete in your school if there's no adaptive program for you. You have to do specialized clubs, you have to do this, you have to do that. And that's a lot of pressure to put on a child. And being a kid should be literally the best. You have no bills, you have no real worries in your life. Like, this should be the time where everything is fun and you just can discover what your talents are, and you find the things that build that passion that will eventually drive you towards something.
Eric, thoughts?
Yeah, I grew up, I played as much as I could. And I ran track, I played volleyball in middle school, I played baseball in high school, I played basketball. And I truly believe that, the skills that I received for football was, attributed to the other sports I played as well. And, I for sure playing defense on basketball is for sure going to help me on the football field, and just like I said, the overall aspect of just going from one team to another, everything, it's like, it works differently. When I go from the football field to the basketball field, like the team camaraderie, just how the structure of things, everything works differently. It forces me to adjust. It forces me to kind of, not get burnt out. I feel like it's a fresh start again. And it's just like a new awakening. It was always fun for me to switch sports.
So I'd like to move on to a slightly different but critically important topic. I think we are all spending a lot of time, rightfully so, we should have been spending it for many, many years, talking about leveling the playing field in society. And it feels to me that sport, and particularly youth sports, is an ideal place to start that. That sports can take on a leadership role in leveling that playing field, not just in sport, but outside of it as well. And I just wanted to sort of get a reaction from each of you. Why, if you believe that, why is sports sort of uniquely positioned to take a stand around leveling playing fields? And I know it's important to all of you. Eric, I want to start with you because of your role with the Vikings.
I need more wording on your question, like leveling the playing field in which way? Like, you have, obviously there's like the financial leveling where, sometimes people, like it took, for me, in order to play football at a young age, it took a village. I had to get cleats from, my mom, my older brother had paid for my admission to play. It was like, that's kind of how it was. But there's also the leveling this playing field where it's like, I could be, where I grew up, if I play with someone whose kid was, his dad was a doctor, we're now on the same level as far as we're both on the same team. We're both working side by side, even though our economic situation may be different. So, there's definitely different types of that on each. So I don't know if you want me to be more specific on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think where I'm headed a little bit is sort of the importance of removing that financial barrier, right? To creating access to sports through coaching and making it not based on social economic status, so that kids from different neighborhoods have different access to better coaching, better equipment, better field conditions, et cetera, et cetera. And it feels to me at some level, and you guys should all weigh in, that we can use sports as an example. If we can create some equity in the sports space, it sets an example for other aspects of society.
Yeah, just continue on my conversation. Sorry, but a conversation that often comes up is like, how come people in American international soccer is like, as far as men's, is not as competitive? That's what I hear all the time. But one of the things I remember from a kid was, my mom paying for my brother's soccer, his club soccer at the time, which, in order to be in a good soccer league as a kid, you have to be in the club. So it's going to cost more. And I remember specifically my mom's kind of stressing about the cost of that for my older brother to play. I didn't play in the club because, there was no way there could be both of us, doing that. But I attended the practices with him. I even played in the practices and stuff like that. But yeah, as far as playing, I had to have the jerseys. I had to be, had to pay for the admission. So just that alone, I feel like can discourage tons of kids from that would maybe playing football or other sports that may be cheaper, from just joining the soccer. They could excel in soccer. That could be their sport. But if the club team is too expensive, that's in their area, that's very competitive and it's going to get them to the next level, then they're not going to ever get to that level.
Lacey, thoughts about this particular topic?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Eric hit the nail on the head for a lot of things. And I was lucky enough, actually, I'm pretty sure I know Eric, so we went to this gym in Phoenix. I was lucky enough. I was like, I know him. I was lucky enough to have the experience where I joined a training group in Phoenix, and it was a mixture of able-bodied and disabled athletes. When I first, long story longer, when I first applied, they were like, no, you can't come. And I just, because of who I am, I'm like, by no, do you mean? But later. So it was eventually yes. And we got to learn firsthand, like the beautiful thing about Paralympic track and field, especially, and able-bodied track and field, is that like it's the same event, it's the same distances, they're all the same events, there's nothing different. The training is the same. The equipment may be a little different. That's the only thing that's different. So you learn deeper and more intricacies about your event when you run into a lot of people going for the same goal that have different issues. Like you develop as an athlete as you see other people's issues, you ultimately grow and perform better together. There are not a lot of inclusive multi-ability programs like that, especially in this country. And it changed me fundamentally as a person. I think it changed a lot of my training partners fundamentally as a person, as people as well. But one of my biggest fears of the Paralympic movement slowly but surely growing, is that it will become less of the differently abled Olympics and more of the privileged Olympics, because a lot of people like speaking about how cool the prosthetics are, how cool the equipment is. People are eventually going to be superseding the non-disabled athletes, but all of that comes at a cost. Like, these prosthetics are insanely expensive, and when you're a child developing in sport, you need a new prosthetic leg at least once a year, especially if you're an active kid. You're banging those things around, those things are blowing up left and right, and like we don't have good access to often pediatric prosthetic care, but also pediatric prosthetic sport specific care. And so we need to create better strategies, I think, not just for children, but also for adults, because you can acquire a disability at any one point in your life, to be able to have those resources to try and see what sport works for them, because there's going to be a lot of hidden talent that never gets an opportunity because they don't have access to the equipment to even try. For a long time, it was access to even knowing about disabled sport. It's still very low on the marketing aspect, I feel like, in sport in this country. That's slowly but surely changing, but it's just, there's a lot of really strong, more further developed countries that are coming up that are top performers in Paralympics, mostly because of the access to equipment and quality equipment. And to me, that is not the spirit of sport.
I want to thank the three of you, as always, on behalf of Athletes for Hope. We're thrilled to have you and honored to have you as members of the organization. And we're also quite honored to be part of the Project Play Summit. And I'm going to turn it back over to Tom, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about next steps that we take from here. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Ivan. We look forward to drafting the statement after the summit with input from your athletes, as well as key parties who can help us get it right. We'd like to close the summit with a look ahead, well beyond the challenges of the here and now. One of the recommendations in our platform for action is for national sport organizations to drive impact through major events in the coming years that they and we can use as a North Star. In 2028, we have the Olympics and Paralympics coming back to Los Angeles. To explore the possibilities there and the role of the Olympic movement in telling a positive story, we're pleased to welcome in Sarah Hirshland, CEO of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee. So welcome, Sarah. Thank you for joining us at the Project Play Summit. How are things going in the Olympic and Paralympic movements? I mean, it's been such a challenging time with the pandemic and the postponement of the games, and oh my gosh, I'm not sure when you sleep.
And wow, thanks, Tom. It's great to be here and great to be with you. And let me start by just saying thank you to you and to the Aspen Institute and all the supporters of Project Play. The work you do is incredibly important, and maybe no more important at a time as we've seen the last few months. So I just want to make sure that I get that in before we get started. We're grateful for your work and your efforts, and it has been a challenging time for sure. There's no question about it. But I'll tell you, we walked through a very difficult moment with the postponement of the games. And the reality is society writ large was facing some very difficult decisions as businesses were closing down and all of that. But each day we're seeing progress. There is more training, more sports practice, more training camps, and even competitions that are starting to happen. And so that is slowly and steadily increasing optimism and energy in our community. And I think, we all realize the magnitude of what has happened and the change that is coming. I don't think any of us are certain about what the medium and long-term ramifications of this change looks like. And so we are still in a place of being nimble and uncertain and unstable in many ways, while at the same time, as I said, there's some increasing optimism and some energy. And look, as well as I do, by definition, athletes are resilient and persistent. And so those of us who spend our time surrounded by them have no choice but to try to be the same. Yeah,
we within Project Play recognize the importance of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee and the NGBs, the 50 or so sport-specific entities that organize wrestling or baseball or table tennis or whatever else it may be. Talk to me a little bit more about the challenges that they have faced since the pandemic hit. I mean, I guess their whole business model has been turned upside down, right?
Certainly, without doubt. I mean, particularly the not-for-profit sport administration aspect of our community relies on membership. Those membership dues, whether those are coming from sports clubs and sort of local businesses, or whether those are coming from individuals, at the end of the day, that's driven locally at the grassroots level. And a lot of that membership revenue has seen declines. These organizations are also the ones running competitions, and many of those competitions, again, start locally. It's the local grassroots competitions that ladder their way up to the regionals and ladder their way up to states. And ultimately, it's the feeder system for those who wear our country's flag and become a part of Team USA. But every one of those athletes started in a local gym or a pool or on a ski slope somewhere. And those competitions, as we all know, have not been happening. And the revenue derived from them is what sustains the sport ecosystem for the national governing bodies. So it's been challenging for sure. At the same time, I'll tell you, the organizations are creative. Some have had the flexibility and the capability to move into virtual competition environments. And they're doing what they can to try to, return to sport as quickly but safely as possible, but also to try to accommodate and adapt and keep their communities engaged. So it's a really challenging time for sure.
Mm-hmm. So given the financial challenges that these NGBs are facing and the USOPC, but also recognizing that, they do have a large community within each of these sport pipelines. How do you assess their opportunity right now to be useful, be valuable? What's the pivot they should be thinking about making at this time? In particular, how to make life better for youth athletes. The kids coming up through your pipeline who one day will be Olympians or will be watching the Olympics and will have fallen in love with a particular sport, or not if they don't have an opportunity to play or have a good experience.
Well, I'll speak on a couple levels. Certainly for us as an organization, we've been very focused on, some foundational cultural change and work that we can do to think about how to build the right structure and infrastructure of governance in sport, of administration, in balancing what I'll call competitive success with athlete well-being. We changed our mission last year to create more balance in that regard. And I think all the organizations, ourselves and our partners are focused on that. The realities of creating healthy cultures where athletes feel a real investment in their long-term well-being, while at the same time, there's a very inherently competitive nature to sport that's frankly what we all love and celebrate. And so we're working hard on creating that balance. And I think many of our partner NGB organizations are doing the same. They're also really focused on engagement. Sometimes, a good crisis forces the doors of change to open, and that allows you to do things that otherwise you may not have been able to do as easily or as readily. So there's been some change that has come that I think allows organizations to connect with their membership base, with their fan base, with their participant base in new and different ways. And a lot of that's been accelerated. And, you think about, I look at the payment industry as an interesting comparison. We were still using credit cards, and we knew that this contactless payment thing was probably coming, but it was going to happen slowly right up until it wasn't. And I think that same thing is happening a little bit in sport. It's like change was happening a little bit slowly, and this has accelerated some of the the engagement, the virtual way of interacting, a lot of that stuff has been accelerated for us, just as it has for other industries. And some of that will prove to be a very good thing.
So it sounds like the message you're trying to convey to everyone in the Olympic movement is like, lean into this moment.
100%.
You know? Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, we within Project Play know historically what has happened with youth sports over time. And one of the first statistics we put on the table back in the spring after COVID hit is that during the last economic recession, sport participation, regular sport participation among kids ages 6 to 12 fell from 45% down to 38%. And, you know, through a lot of effort by a lot of organizations, including the USOPC, which is, you know, put together the How to Coach Kids website and done more with American Development Model, et cetera, has been a real plus in terms of helping us collectively drive progress. We're starting to see it. We're starting to see coach training go up a little bit more. We're seeing participation tick up a little bit, really across all income categories. But then COVID hits, and then we're like, oh my gosh. And if you look back at the, you know, the recession, you know, those numbers, we know what happened when the economy crunched things, kids stopped playing, and we still haven't got back to where we were back in 2008. So with that in mind, I mean, what should we be thinking about? What to make sure the same thing doesn't happen this time?
Well, I think, and I'll, you know, frankly, this is exactly what's quote keeping me up at night these days, is a real concern for the long-term viability and sustainability of sport development. And it's an important area for all of us to be focused on. And no one has articulated and documented more eloquently than you guys the realities of this fragmented ecosystem that we live in and operate in. And I think in sort of hindsight, or in the moment of the pandemic where we find ourselves, that gets exacerbated enormously. And I've really seen that over the last 6 months. The fragmentation and the fragmented nature of our ecosystem, one, it becomes a little bit easy to take it for granted. And we forget just how significant the contributions are from so many different parts of our society. And when one of those is strained or impacted, it has really significant repercussions. And yet, because of the fragmentation, it makes it hard for us to have coordinated action or corrective action to fix it. And I think, you know, if I were to say, what am I seeing happen? That's what I'm seeing really play out. And it's worrisome, because it's hard for us as sport to say, let's come together and fix this, because we aren't used to operating in a cohesive way. We're operating in a pretty fragmented way. So as I look forward, you know, I think we've got to figure out, how do we minimize or mitigate the realities of this fragmented environment, and try to work more effectively collectively to take some corrective action in advocating for sport at the development level all the way up. And that, you know, I think, you know, is hard. We have seen some small wins, but I think in the next few years, we have an opportunity for big wins, but frankly, we need them.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I love that the USOPC has done is this American Development Model, right? Started with USA Hockey, then USOPC said, maybe we can, you know, think about this in a sport agnostic type of way, and then talk to the different NGBs about developing their own American Development Model programs. And a lot of them have, right? And so an ADM is really just a set of best practices. Here's what needs to happen with kids between the ages of whatever, 6 and under, or 6 and 9, and 9 to 13, and 16 and over. So people have some sense of what the pipeline ought to look like from the earliest ages forward. So, I mean, given that, I mean, is that potentially a way for the USOPC and the NGBs? Because you can't take it all on. You can't, you know, I mean, we're talking about a $30 to $40 billion industry in this country that has an enormous number of players in this space. But as you think about, and I know it's complicated, as you think about where the USOPC's lane might be, Does that strike you as potentially an opportunity, doing more with that?
There's no question. And I think the reality, Tom, is our role, if we're successful, is to have, the best coaches training the best athletes in our country across all of these different sports. And so at the end of the day, number one, our partnership with the NGBs is critical. But there are aspects that are sport agnostic where we can be incredibly efficient and effective in defining I'll call it a best practice, as you've described. The American development model is sport agnostic that then gets customized by sport. I think there's more we can do with the American development model. It was built and has existed in the capacity of thinking about the physical development of young people. Now you layer in the mental and emotional development of young people, and you start training coaches in that. Now you're creating some really powerful sport agnostic opportunities to create best practices that get meaningful very quickly. Then you try to create a system of accountability around it so that you're sure that people are living up and actually implementing those best practices. And you've got a real shot to change the way young people are coached, for example, which I think you and I agree is one of the most fundamental aspects of sport, and really important. So yeah, there's real opportunity for us to take what we're doing anyway because of who we are, and figure out how to put a lens on it that can help the greater good.
Yeah, what's interesting about coaching is coaches aren't the they're not the actors who get kids into sports. That's parents. They're the ones who sign them up when they're 4 and 5 and 6. But it's coaches who are the most significant players in terms of whether a child stays involved in sport and develops. And we know from our data that we've collected that the average kid quits sport by age 11, in pretty much every sport, and that they play 2.9 years. So we're getting kids into sport, but they're not sticking around. So if we do more with coaching, how much optimism do you have that we could maybe stretch those numbers a bit?
I think significant. I don't think coaching alone solves the issue, but I think it's significant. And fundamentally, a big part of the challenge is just kids have to have fun, right? They have to have fun. And so we've got to think about the concept of how do we balance fun with the development and the improvement, and also find ways and places for everybody to fit regardless of their competitive level. And that's another real challenge, that if you don't have the ecosystem working well together, those pathways aren't cohesive. And I think you have kids run into dead ends. And that's challenging. That, or there's an economic barrier that sits, which is another key area to focus on.
Right. That's an issue for society in general to focus on. I mean, that's a tough one. So, I mean, Sarah, I know this stuff matters to you. Tell me a little, take a step back here and help people understand why this connects with Sarah Hirshland. You were a kid once, and sport, did you have a good coach? Did you find a sport that sort of made you who you are?
Yeah, Tom, it's a good question. There's no doubt. Interestingly, I was a young person who I tried a lot, and I look back on it now and I'm grateful to my parents that I tried a lot. I tried figure skating, I tried gymnastics, I was a ballet dancer. I ended up trying field hockey, and sort of soccer was what stuck. So by the time I was a teenager and into high school, I took soccer pretty seriously and was on my high school team, and we were pretty good. That was, I might add, the state championship in soccer is the biggest and most important trophy I ever won. And then I went into the business side and said, okay, we're good. But yes, I did. And I tried a lot of things and had varying levels of success in different things. And that was for a lot of reasons. Some of that was my own physical development. Some of that was the friends you make, the coach that you like or don't like, the convenience of it in your family's lifestyle. There are so many factors that go into it. But for me, sport was a really important place where I felt like I belonged. I went to a private school. I went to a private school on a scholarship. I didn't live in the neighborhood where a lot of my friends lived. And so as a result of that, you know, I could have easily been an outsider, and sport was the place where I wasn't an outsider. And so for me, a lot of the drive of sport is both the fundamental skills that it teaches you as a human being, not only physical, but the teamwork and the, you know, learning how to lose and resiliency and some of these sorts of things. But it was also a place where some barriers came down, and there was a real inclusiveness and sense of team, where as a young person, for me, I felt like I belonged, and that drove my desire to work in sport, and fundamentally is a huge motivator for me every day in my role here. I genuinely believe and want everybody who wants to participate to have the ability to do so, because I believe in it so strongly as a creator of community, but also as just a creator of strong human development. So I'm a believer in it fundamentally as a system, and I'm inspired by it at the most elite levels with our Olympic and Paralympic athletes who prove that what many of us aren't sure is possible, and make you believe every day.
Mm-hmm. You know, one of the assets that you have with your partners is the 2028 games are coming to Los Angeles, right? And so we talked about this in a piece that I wrote back in June and said, okay, look, this is a really, really difficult time that everyone's in right now. But let's take the long-term view. Where do we want our sports system to be in 2028? What is the story we collectively want to tell as a country? What will make us feel good? What will actually produce outcomes that are valuable for the Olympic movement, for the sports sector, and for society in general? So that's where we're trying to get everybody to think, okay, what's the system? What are the features that we need to put in place to make sport accessible to all kids and something that they sustain into their teenage years and ideally in adulthood? How do you, Sarah, look at the 2028 games as an opportunity? And I know you're still trying to, there's a lot to figure out, but what's sort of rolling through your mind right now?
Well, I think, you know, we know that when you host the world, what we'll do is bring together the most diverse base of athletes across the most diverse set of sports. So it becomes this incredible melting pot of sport, unlike anything else. We will have, you know, every flavor of athlete you could have across this massive diversity of sport and event. And, you know, the motivation there is that everybody can see themselves somewhere. Everybody can relate to that experience. And when you do it on your home turf, it's very visible, right? It is, this country will see and participate in the Olympic and Paralympic Games when it's in our home turf without having to work hard to do so, because it will be so top of mind. So the motivation is to allow everyone to see themselves somewhere in that experience and be motivated by it. I fully expect those games will drive youth participation in sport. They will drive the consumption of sport as fans in a meaningful way across sport that is, quote, atypical to what we are used to in this country. New sports can grow out of an Olympic or Paralympic Games experience, and I think we will see that happen again. And I think really importantly, you know, you talk about the impact on society more broadly. That will happen in a very profound way with the Paralympics. This will be the first time that the Paralympics really sees the world or this country in such a visible and prominent way. And while I love that for the Paralympics on its own, what it will do for the way we think about and the way we integrate people with disabilities into our society, I think has a really profound ability to have lasting impact that we're all going to be really proud of.
Yeah, and maybe how we think about the purpose of competition itself.
Right.
Right. I mean, you know, you see someone who's overcoming incredible barriers and what that does for them personally. Forget the medal that ends up around their neck, but what that does for them personally, and how we think about what the role of sport in our society is. I agree with you. I think it's a tremendous opportunity. And I wish you the best, Sarah.
It's a
So
big undertaking.
thank you for joining us, and thank you for your engagements in Project Play.
It's my pleasure, Tom. Thanks for all you do.
Okay. That's a wrap for the summit. On behalf of the Sports and Society program, I hope you enjoyed our biggest and most ambitious one yet. I want to thank the more than 100 speakers and moderators who joined us. Also, all of our partners who support Project Play, including those who made this year's event possible. ESPN and TeamSnap, our presenting sponsors, as well as the Hospital for Special Surgery, Kellogg's, Go-Go Squeeze, and the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation. I also want to thank our amazing team at Aspen, Marty Fox, Jennifer Brown-Lerner, John Solomon, Rania Bautista, Fumiana Machon, and Emily Stetz, and the rest of the folks behind the scenes at the Institute. Finally, I want to thank you, our Project Play Network. Your good, smart, brave, hard work is making a difference in the lives of children and communities. Sport for all, play for life, it's worth the effort. See you next year, hopefully in person, and in the meantime, please stay in touch.